Hello? Hello?
All right, we got 2 minutes to start. So we got 2 minutes before we start. Okay. That's when he's going to start the video. I guess we can make some small talk. So we got a small group here. How many of you here are at DrupalCon Nashville? You, yeah, back there. Right on, right on. I had a good time there while I was there myself. One of the things we're going to talk about tonight is the layout initiative and some of our experiences working with some of the folks there. I know that I promised them I would try to rally the troops here and do a sprint or two. Just like anything else, you know, everyone needs eyes on the project. So I think we're about good to begin. So tonight we've got 2 speakers. First Ted, and then Alexis. Ted's going to give us an update on his Voters Pledge project. So Ted, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. So I have been working on this since last fall, and somewhere around November, December, I kind of was able to really start up on Drupal 8 and get going with the site. Let me just give you a quick glance. Did you say, what, 10 minutes or less than that, 5 minutes? What do I have?
You got 10 minutes, man.
Okay.
Maybe more if you need it. You know, the rain's out there, so.
All right.
You know,
So what you're seeing here is a pretty basic approach to an old-fashioned content management system that doesn't have a whole lot of so let me tell you how I got here. And first of all, okay. What we're dealing with are, wait a minute, this isn't, there we go, update, that's where I wanted to start. Update, live and incorporated. We have incorporated as a not-for-profit called Voters Pledge, Inc. Last time I was having problems trying to figure out how I was going to do interactive content where people would do multiple choice questions and things like that. Several months ago, and actually Stan pointed me to a learning management system called Opinio. I looked at it, I tried it out, I decided it has great ideas, but it also pointed me to something that was going to work better for me, which was this single content type called H5P, interactive content. There is a project in Drupal for H5P, and the concept of it is that there are open source libraries that are used in all sorts of educational modules, and probably when Opinio gets to its Drupal 8 version, they're going to dump all of their various multiple choice content types and pretty much move everything into H5P, which is why I decided I was just going to go directly in and not take all the baggage of the whole Opinio system that had some experimental modules as deep dependencies in there that I didn't want to have to deal with. Okay, so the H5P has various kinds of libraries that you'll see that have multiple choice questions or series of questions, drag and drop pictures, or fill in the blanks, or, you know, the memory games of concentration. You pick 2 pictures and get them to match. You know, all of those, each one is its own little library, so you can pick them. All you have to do in Drupal is create a content type where this field is mapped to the H5P content. And then that field, when you go to add a content, and when you go to that field, you pick which one of the library types you want, and then you add in all of your question content. So it's like this one field packages the whole library that you need for that question type. I can demonstrate it for you in a minute. So that kind of solved my biggest problem, and that replaced any questions that I had about what am I going to find for quiz modules in Drupal 8. It's all handled with H5P. Another question I had to deal with was, where did I want to use taxonomies versus content types? Because I had a lot of topic organizations that I wanted to do. I am educating voters around 3 basic areas. The first are basic civics, what the Constitution says, how do you run elections, how does the government run itself. The next big, huge area is everything you need to know to understand policy issues, to read a policy issue article. So all of the things from economics to foreign policy to infrastructure and services, government services, all of those, it's an endless number of topics that could come in under there. And the third big category is what I call the campaign survival kit. What do you need to do as a voter to be able to know how to follow a campaign? When people are lying to you, how are they cheating? How are they trying to get your vote? How are they pitching good things to you? How do you differentiate between one set of ideas and another set of ideas? How do you survive and try to, so that when they're trying to outsmart you, you can bring some smarts yourself and be responsible for your own vote and not just be somebody's puppet. Okay? Not that any of us coming to a Drupal event would ever be somebody's puppet in voting, of course. So with around those three big topics, I have subtopics and so forth. I want to be able to catalog them. So I had a little bit of challenge trying to use hierarchies with parent levels and then how to filter by them. And I'm still not sure I came out with the right solution. If, you know, I may find out there's a better way to do it. Because sometimes I wanted to be able to filter from both levels at once. And anyway, I figured out several times to do it. Third thing I needed to do is figure out how to handle donations, and I found a very, very simple way to do it. Has anybody heard of DonorBox? Okay, it has a good, yeah, there's one, okay. It has a good integration element with Drupal, and I'll show that to you in a minute also. Basically, you fill in an account at DonorBox. You might hook it up with Stripe for payment if you use Stripe. I found that is a very good internationally accepted, simple to use payment interface. And so Stripe plugs into DonorBox. You go to DonorBox, you fill in your campaign form to say what's your target, your goal, your donation levels, you put in the information that displays, and when you're finished, it gives you code. A script, not very long, and you just paste that into a basic page in the body field of a basic page. You put that basic page wherever you want, menu driven or whatever, and then when anybody goes to that basic page, they see the page that links to, that pulls in your DonorBox campaign form, and they can use that to interact with DonorBox to do the contribution, which goes through processes through Stripe. So it's very elegant. In the picture that I show you here, you will see that I have started to organize things around events, where an event is an activity. Like if I had an event here some upcoming night where we had time to do a little test here, you might all be signing in, or you might just do it as guests. I would take you to this page or whatever. You would pick the page for the meetup, and you click on the link, and then you see where it says lessons there. Each one of those would be a grouping, and if you clicked on a lesson, you would get to something like this information security card. Or one lesson might be policy issues, and within that there are several cards. So the information security is an example of a card where I have a slide with some words if you want to read them, and then challenges listed in a table. That's from the cards, that's from the content, the H5P content type. And I've even got difficulty ratings for them. And then if you click on one of them, you get a question, and this was a multiple choice question where I picked a right answer and a wrong answer, and you can see it automatically does the styling of the scoring and the green and the check mark and the X, and there's a 2 points available. This star would turn into a gold there, and you can retry it. So anyway, it's this is how you get through the structure of it. So what did I do for theming? I wanted to keep it simple, but I wanted to try to be as much ahead of the, I mean, in with the future as possible, not have to do my own theming thinking much at all. I learned a bad lesson with doing Omega 3 many years ago in 7, which died a miserable death, and there's no support for that in the future. I loved how there was so much you could do from the user interface. I'm all about what can I do from the user interface and not having to learn to be a developer. So what I found out is that with the Bootstrap module or theme in Drupal, it connects to 3.3. There is a 4.1 now in Bootstrap, but the module doesn't support that yet. And there's no telling when Mark Carver will get around to finishing that upgrade. He's trying to improve and streamline a lot of things to do that. I understand a big task. You can do CDN, SAS, or less to do this. The CDN is the easiest way, where I just pick the CDN. It pulls in all the files for me. I was even able to select a skin out of about 12 skins that come with Bootstrap. I chose Flatly. And then I also use the Views Bootstrap module, which provides several layouts like Bootstrap Table, Bootstrap List Group, Bootstrap Grid. And all that does is take the same basic views or whatever, but it adds some selectors that are specific to Bootstrap. So it does some of the lifting for you of assigning certain elements to certain classes that the Bootstrap theme will recognize. It does not directly use panels, but this was the fun thing. I learned how to put panels in by assigning classes in various views fields where necessary by following the documentation at getbootstrap.org. I really want to use the cards that they've moved to in Bootstrap 4 instead of panels. I think they're probably going to be a little tighter, a little easier to work with, but I have not figured out how to get there yet. I also went about recoloring my logo. It used to be, using the blue and some pink or whatever, but I decided I want to try to get away from red and blue that suggest anything Republican or Democrat. So this is just within the last couple of days, I'm trying out this approach to my logo color. To me, it evokes a little bit of the classroom concept. Even the palm color isn't necessarily specifically to colored or non-colored skin tone. It's kind of neutral in that area, so I don't think there's anything about that that's going to offend anybody. And the green check mark is recognizable. Anyway, so some of the things I also had to learn is, again, reading in the documentation, that little things like putting in the class for a list element, list unstyled. That takes away the bullets or the numbers so that you can have your list without any markings. That's a Bootstrap specific class. So it's just a few of these things I had to learn that were fairly easy to learn for me as a business guy, as a site builder guy, not to have to be a developer or a themer to learn how to do that. I already mentioned about the classes for panels. The learning curve that's been kind of steep was trying to figure out where to put the classes or the selectors. Sometimes if there's a label or field, or the field and label combination, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, and if there was a link over, and so I'm still working through some of those details to figure out where to put the class names to get it to work. I still haven't figured out if there's something where I need to be able to manage a clear fix or something, but anyway. I do have it running off of a sub-theme, but I haven't done a thing yet to customize the sub-theme, so I'm preparing for my next step, which is basically I need to be able to start changing. In Bootstrap, you don't do a lot of color choices. You basically pick one primary color for your brand, and then your other colors come from grayscales and lightening and darkening from your primary color, and then you also have your basic warning, success, info colors that are reaction colors that are kind of independent of your brand color. So there's not a lot that I'm expecting to have to do for that. Another lessons learned is I started with a Softaculous install, and then when I needed a module that had a library, I found the only way I could do that was either a roundabout way or to do it with Composer, and I bit the bullet and I manually switched everything over to Composer, including moving all of my modules into the contrib folder under the modules thing, and with, of course, the JSON file. Wasn't too difficult to do. It was a good experience. And now I feel like I'm pretty much ahead of where a lot of ordinary people are out there on Slack, figuring, oh, I can't get my Composer update to work. And it's like, oh, I'm figuring out some stuff about that. I can help you. So, I don't pretend to help very much, but, I can try. Media. In 8.5, since we're in 8.5, I decided to switch to the new media since I was just getting the point to start using it, but I am not going to invest any time or effort putting entity browsers or file browsers or anything like that, because that is in serious development right now. A lot of it's going to drop by 8.6, and I don't want to bring in a contrib module that has another dependency when it may or may not shake out, and I don't really have to have it right now. So anybody who's playing in Drupal 8.5 and they're working with media, and if you can wait a few months and see what shakes out before you commit too far into that, that will, save you time now and later, at least in my opinion. The last thing, another thing I've been trying to do just recently is learning the modern design language. So learning what Bootstrap, of course, how it's built. But then I just discovered a couple of days ago Google's material design concept. It's really, oh, you're shaking your head? Okay, oh, you don't know it. I thought maybe you had experience with it and didn't like it. Material design is a language basically describing how web design should work. The idea of layers, for example. One thing can never pass through another thing. So the idea is everything is going to be flat. If you're using shadows or whatever, it all needs to be predictable, so things are in layers. It provides a simplicity of rules for design that help you. And then the colors, where you're learning, it's even got a color generator. So you pick whatever you want as your kind of a primary color, and then it's got 8 or 9 shades on a scale that will automatically pull in for you. You can pick your primary color and secondary color. It just gives good design rules and concepts for getting up to speed with what is modern web design look like. Oh, there's plenty there for me to learn. I'm just learning a handful of things. And true to form, I get real cocky about how much I think I've learned when it's really just that little. So I'm always happy to share and that. What I still need, a couple of little things. I need to an hour or two of somebody's help, just helping me do a staging environment that matches with my production. I don't want to go through this whole personal developer desktop thing that's got all these designer packages and stuff like that. Yeah.
Where's your site hosted?
Green Geeks. I just have a single site at production. I'm doing my work in production right now, so I would be happy if anybody wanted to donate a better hosting situation for the future of Voters Pledge. That'd be wonderful, but that's not a necessity right now. But I just want to be able to have my staging environment to do my work where I can use the sync function that's built into Drupal 8. I know how it works. Now that I have one site and I want to create another site that uses the same ID or whatever, I just want a little guidance getting over that hump of getting that done. I could use an hour or two of help for the theme customizations, just figuring out whether I need to go into my sub-theme and put some CSS styling, or if I should switch to the Sass approach where I can use Bootstrap's own export function where you pick your colors on a page, you put in your numbers and then click the export button and it gives you the files that you need. So those are just a couple of simple things that I could use. And my final line is, this is my story. which is what can a site builder do alone without deep Drupal training, but just several years of building a site or two here along the way. How to keep it simple, that's always my story. A lot of you, you can't deliver projects by keeping it simple, but for those of you who can deliver a project on the simple, where you hand it over and somebody else looks at what you've done and says, yeah, I can take that over because it's all coloring within the boxes that Drupal is growing on, that's my specialty, okay? Just to give you one quick look here, we will go to the events page. We go to a sample event, and you all can do this on your own phone. If you go to voterspledge.org during break or whatever, try it, see what it looks like on your phone. Let's go to understanding policy. What is harassment? You look beautiful. It depends on who says that to whom and where as to whether or not that's going to be harassment or not. Now, let me show you how this looks on a phone. It can go down like that. Which events in the workplace can be forms of illegal harassment? So raise your hand if you want me to check the box as I read it off here. Interfering with the work performance of an employee over 40 years old. Okay, I've got some check hands. A discreet romantic affair between an employee and a supervisor. Okay, we've got some hands there. Displaying offensive pictures at one's desk. Got some hands there. A single incident where someone told an offensive joke. You're nodding your head. Okay. Check box. Oh, we got some greens and reds. Now you notice I have this set so that I can give feedback according to whether you got the answer right or wrong. If I had not given the proper answers, it might still display because I said display the explanation under the right answer if they didn't pick it. Okay? And from the EEOC, harassment becomes unlawful when enduring the offensive conduct becomes a condition of continued employment, or the conduct is severe or pervasive enough to create a work environment that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive. A discrete affair does not describe an intimidating, hostile, or abusive work environment. So I'm just going off of the link that I have from reading the EEOC page. You may have discussions in one state or another or situation to make a point of why something's different, but just from the general level, this is kind of the idea. The single incident, again, was one of those things where it said petty slights, annoyances, and isolated incidents, less extremely serious, will not rise to the level of illegality. Anyway, that's the end of my demonstration. I'm sure I went over time.
No, you're good, man. You did a lot of hard work here, and we can see it, and we appreciate you showing this, man.
Okay. I should say any questions, but we can all talk to me later if you have ideas, or...
Yeah, for sure, man. And hit us up over Slack, because I'm definitely interested in trying to help you out or find some help for you.
Great.
So, right on. All right.
I do hang out on Slack in the greater DC channel.
Ready to come on? Sure. Yeah, for sure. So aside from Ted's project, we're also looking for other folks to showcase their projects as well, bring them in front of us so we can rally around y'all and help you with either advice or information or point you in the right direction maybe. And usually I know that I usually end up learning more from helping someone than someone learns from me. So cool. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for coming tonight, you guys. Sorry about the rain. So this is a very abbreviated version of the talk that I gave at DrupalCon Nashville, talking about modern CSS. So essentially, this is all the stuff that you might find scary about CSS. This is emerging tech that hasn't been around for very long, but has pretty good browser support now. So you can probably use it on your client sites with some caveats. It's important to know what your fallbacks are. So here we go. First off, I'm Alexis Findison. My last name is a mouthful. I apologize. But I work here at Chief, and I am Associate Director of Technology. So I started out in design and gradually worked my way into web development. So you don't have to be, a computer science major to get into this stuff. But essentially, the quick version of this talk is that the CSS you will learn here will improve performance on the front end. It will allow you to write less code while you are developing a site. And it'll give you that nice burn of, oh yes, I just wrote one line of CSS and it did all of the things. This is magic. So I highly recommend this. So the key thing here is that with emerging tech, you need to keep in mind your browser support. So for this, I highly recommend going to caniuse.com. They'll give you a handy grid of different browsers, and it'll give you like green for good and red for it doesn't support it. There are some occasions where it's incorrect, so do your testing. So take a look at your browsers. You can look at them in Browser Stack. They do have a trial version or a version where you can get a subscription, or you can install a virtual machine where you test on Internet Explorer that you've installed locally. And you also need to write around your support to make sure that your clients know what you're building for before they sign anything. Because the worst case scenario is that you don't support the browser that they want, and then you get to the end of the project and they're like, where's IE 11? So let's make sure that we talk to clients first about what we're supporting, make sure that we can support what they want, and if they do need something older, that we're not using this new tech to do it, that we're using something a little bit older that's going to support things across the board so that they're not seeing degraded experiences in those choice browsers. And then finally, make sure that you have everybody on your team on board. You got to talk to your designers, your UXers, your strategists to make sure that everything is going to work according to plan, so that Photoshop comps aren't going in front of clients without being approved by developers to say, oh yes, we can build that with that browser support that we have in that contract. So, without further ado, the actual tech here. So first up is Flexbox. This is one of the most powerful tools on the internet right now. It's for layouts, and essentially it gives you columns that respond and react to each other. It can be ratios of each other. It can be whether or not there's content in that other area. So essentially what you can do is you can make this kind of layout without floats and nth childs and clears and all of that extra nonsense. You can do this kind of a layout with 2 lines of CSS. So this case does not use Flexbox, but I use this as an example because I wish I had Flexbox at the time. So if I were to go back and redo this, if they were to give me 20 minutes worth of time for this particular piece of content, I could rewrite it and strip out 80 lines of CSS. It's not going to have that big of an impact on the performance of the site overall because it's only on one specific area. But if I were to do this on the entire site, it would drastically cut down that CSS file. And again, over here, you can see, so this is findyourpark.com. Down at the bottom here, you have plan your visit, found my park on Twitter and share on Facebook. And these buttons are using Flexbox. And you can see that right now they're stacked. You got 2 on top, 1 on the bottom. But if we stretch our browser out and have enough room, they all align with each other. This is native to Flexbox. So essentially all you have to do is put display flex on your wrapper. I stripped out a bunch of details for the sake of expediency, but essentially that is the starting point. I recommend doing that and then seeing what happens. And then gradually add in additional declarations. So there's a very handy guide on csstricks.com. If you Google CSS tricks and Flexbox, it will give you a shortcut version of this. But once you have your layout applied on the wrapper, you can then go in and say, okay, for this individual item, say it's the last thing in the array, or the very first thing, and it's way more important, and we want it to be bigger than the rest, you can apply overrides for those internal items specifically. So the important thing here is don't use Flexbox if you need a specific width at a specific breakpoint. If your comps require you to be pixel perfect, this is something that will behave very well for you when you're doing responsive layouts. But if you have to be to the pixel, this might cause you some issues. So, you know, check your breakpoints, make sure that it's matching what your comps match. And then also, you can use Flexbox to reorder the content on your page to say, order, I want this to be 1, and order, I want this to be 3. But if you do that, it doesn't actually rearrange the DOM in a way that people using keyboards or screen readers can recognize. So don't use order when you actually need to read that content. Order is handy if you're using something that's just for display purposes only. If you have like an image and it doesn't matter if it goes before or after the headline in, say, a list view, that's okay. But don't use it when it's going to change the order of, say, a toggle to open an accordion. So next up is CSS grids. This is Flexbox on steroids, except CSS grids is like all about positioning in exactly where you want it to be. So you can set up a grid. Again, this one doesn't use CSS grids. I wish I had it at the time. So if I were to do this again, CSS grids would absolutely be the way to go. So if you have to flow something where everything is edge to edge, this is the perfect kind of solution. But essentially what you do is you set up your grid lines, and then you say where something will start along a line and where it's going to end along a line. So you set up rows and columns. So the trick with this is remembering that you just need to declare display grid, template columns, and template rows. So the way that you do this is all you actually need is the width of the columns and rows, but you can assign names to all of the lines in between them, including the starting and end lines, by adding those names in between the declarations. So you see here we have grid template columns, 150 pix, and then call foo, and then 2 additional declarations of 150 pix. So call foo is going to be not the very starting line, but the first line inside of the grid, because it's between the 150 and the 150. Make sense? Yeah? Okay, so rows work the same way. So after you get that down, you can then assign regions to say, okay, I have a region that starts column line and this row line. And then that way you can say this particular item, I just want it to be in that region. I don't want to have to remember the names of those grid lines. It makes it a lot easier. And then grid can be a little tricky across breakpoints. So I recommend avoiding this when simple floats or Flexbox is going to do the trick for you. CSS grids is really useful for that two-dimensional layout to say I want something both top and left to right aligned. Whereas Flexbox is good for one direction or the other. You can do columns in Flexbox just like you can do rows, but CSS grids is for when you need both specifically. Pseudo elements. So this is one of my favorite things, actually. I use this all the time. You can add things into your page that don't necessarily need to have a div, don't need to have text associated with them. Maybe it's just a visual element. So here you can see next to our activities, we have little icons. You know, in the history of CSS, we've done this a bunch of different ways. There have been, you know, icon sets where you put in an I tag with a character inside of it, or you use like a special class on an empty div, or, you know, it all adds in markup that you don't need. And the I tag in particular causes accessibility issues. Like that's going to get read by a screen reader, and you don't want to read off that weird random character. So what you can do is on these list items, if you, these are taxonomy terms, so we added the taxonomy term value as a class to this list, and then we're keying off of that value to say, oh, on historical, I want this little monument icon, and on tours, I want this little park ranger hat icon, and those are all before elements. So the way that we do that is by declaring a before element. You can use the double colon, but I find that the single colon works fine all the time, and I don't really want to write an extra line of CSS, so whatever. But all you need is the content declaration, and you can leave that empty if you want to, if it's just going to be a plain div, like if you want it just to be a box. But in content is where you would put your font declaration for that icon itself. Or the image, the URL path to it in your theme. And then everything else attached to that before element or after element is exactly like how you would use the box model. You can assign all of the same CSS attributes to it. It'll work great. So tricky thing with this, make sure you don't put anything in there that needs to be read. So this is an accessibility problem. If you put in your before or after element things like open or close or click here. Oh, please don't do that even in real buttons. But with before or after elements, make sure that they're just visual enhancements to your page and not real content. And then transitions and animations. So a lot of sites have simple hover states and simple page scrolls and that kind of thing. But what you can do with CSS is make things have a little bit of character and feel like, oh, this site has something special going on. So the animation here is our menu animation for a site that has not launched yet, should in the next couple of months. But the menu button, you can see, was collapsing and expanding those 3 lines. And that's done using CSS transitions. And then additionally here, so you can see the gradual fading and saturation change on these images as you hover over. And then also the smooth transition of the button as you're hovering. So this is one of the places that I use CSS transitions most often, is in hover states, because it's the easiest place. And it's the most subtle, like people don't really notice it. It just adds a little something that makes the site seem polished. So the key here is that you can use keyframes to do these kind of animations. And you can set those to start and end at a certain time in the loop, essentially. You can set it to run only once, and that's fine too, but you set the timing for it separately. So after you say, okay, at the beginning of this animation, I need this thing to be 0% opacity, and at the end of it, I need it to be 100% opacity. Great. Then I'm going to add my animation into my element itself. And when I'm hovering, it's going to do that animation that I've already predefined, except on the element, I'm going to say how long it's going to take, how many times I want it to loop, etc., etc. This is the long form, just like saying background instead of background image, background color, background position, etc. So you can put all of these into one declaration that's just animation, which you can see down here at the bottom. It's a lot simpler. And then transitions themselves, so if you're just using transition instead of keyframe, this is a little bit simpler. All you have to do is say which element you are transitioning and how long you want it to run for. So let's see here. You can assign these different variables to it. The cubic Bezier curve is kind of like advanced. You don't actually have to use that. That's just to say, I want this to respond a little bit more like JavaScript would. And there are a lot of generators online where you can find places that'll calculate this for you. Don't do this by hand. It's a pain. So the properties, what's changing. The duration is how long it takes to complete. The timing function is how it transitions. So you may be familiar with linear or with ease in, that kind of a thing. That's what we're talking about with timing function. And then delay, you can actually set how long you want it to wait before it starts. So if you need to hover and then give it like half a second, and then we want it to do something else special, sure, you can add a little delay to it. So trick thing with this is don't do it when it distracts from the experience. You don't want to add too many of these in or have them be too outrageous and distract from your core message to say like, oh, come here and donate over here, or oh, sign up over here. You know, keep these to your calls to action, and to really key areas of your site. So blend modes. There are two forms of blend modes in modern CSS. You can do mixed blend mode or background blend mode. Mixed blend mode essentially just mixes two divs together, and background blend mode mixes a background image together with its background color on a single element. So let's see if this plays. Okay, all right, great. So this is an example that I blatantly stole. There is credit in the slides. But somebody made this beautiful code pen that shows you all of the different types of blend modes that you can apply. This is using mixed blend mode because Washington, D.C. on top is a separate div than the view of the reflecting pool. But you can see the different ways that the div interacts with the image behind it. This is key because if you apply this full stop to a site, you may run into accessibility issues yet again. So keep in mind your color contrast requirements. Keep in mind the different kinds of things that you're trying to blend together. If your content management system, if Drupal is allowing people to put in their own images, make sure you account for the kinds of images they might upload. So the key for me is to take a look at black and white. And that's going to cover the gamut. So we'll skip these ones. My backup slides. And then this is background blend mode. This is going through the same thing. It goes through all the different blend modes that you can play with. This one is really fun to go to live because you can apply the different styles. You can see me scrolling through them here. So you have a slew of things to choose from. These are essentially going to reflect the kinds of things that you can do in Photoshop. So if you're a designer, this will feel very familiar. If you're not a designer, just ask your designer. They are sure to point you in the right direction. You can even give them a couple of options to be like, I'm not sure between overlay and screen. And they'll be like, let me try a couple examples, and then decide from there. So all you need here is the value and mixed blend mode or background blend mode. Easy peasy. So again, one more time, just hammer it home. It's very important. Don't use this when it will negatively affect accessibility. Okay. Finally, Drupal GovCon. It is happening in August. Tickets are free. I highly recommend that you go. There are lots of sessions by very talented developers and project managers and designers, and they're opening it up. It's not all dev. Highly encourage you to attend. It's at National Institute of Health in Bethesda. That's it.
Do you, any of you folks have questions? No? All right.
One
cool.
in the back.
One in the back.
Hi. So about the blend mode, I've never seen that before. This is kind of exciting. Definitely could have used that for this project I was just working on.
Oh, that's very exciting.
But so that's kind of like, it doesn't matter if you use it. That's kind of like Flexbox. You can use it for the higher end browsers, and that's okay to use that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just won't blend in older browsers.
Right.
So with the case of mixed blend mode, whatever's on top is going to just be full opacity. And in the case of background blend mode, it's just going to be whatever your background image is, as opposed to the background image plus the color.
So there's no like z-index, anything like that. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
If you need something to be on top, you would still need to think about z-index, but
Between the divs and whatnot, as it's stacking, I really don't have to worry about it if I'm doing the blend mode, the blend mode now.
So if you have, it kind of depends on the use case. So if you have text, I still would encourage you to make sure that the text is on top in case of those fallbacks.
Okay.
Because if you put something in front that's going to obscure your text, it means that in older browsers people aren't going to be able to read that content.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, no
That
problem.
was exciting.
Yes.
Got it.
Thank you, Stan. My question is about swapping out new for the old. And you mentioned one time that if someone gave you 20 minutes, you could do the Flipbox,
Yeah.
the Flexbox, sorry. Could you speak a little bit more to taking old CSS and putting in the modern CSS?
Yeah. Okay, so a little bit of caveat
or
there.
is this-
I wrote the CSS for the first version, so it would only take me 20 minutes because I wrote it. So I know all of the pieces that would be affected. If I were to look at somebody's legacy website, it might take a bit longer, but you know. I don't want to give you false impressions, sorry about that. But essentially, if you do have a site with an older theme, and I would say like if it was written 3 to 5 years ago, there's probably a decent amount that can be stripped out in regards to the CSS that's been written in order to streamline that CSS. That said, if it is an older theme, it might be worth it to revisit the entire theme because CSS tends to tendril out and cause some style bleed. So if you don't know all the places that a particular line of CSS is going to touch, you might break things unintentionally, etc. So if this is a site that you're maintaining, that you know the ins and outs, all for it.
So I'm kind of hearing it's better to kind of start from scratch than to really reinvent the wheel.
It really depends on the case. Legacy sites have a bad rap. If it's been well executed, if you had a development team that thought about essentially object-oriented programming while they're working with their CSS, you're going to be in good shape. If you have a theme that has a lot of importance in it, like that's a red flag. But beyond that, it would really take a theme audit to determine if it's worthwhile to rebuild or to just adjust a few things.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Anyone else? No.
Just had some comments to share for the question.
I think for the blend modes, some of the functions are one way, so the layering does matter because it'll determine like which one gets done, like which settings determine the settings of the other one, basically.
That is an excellent point. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and then for the CSS, it depends entirely on the structure. That's my only comment. Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else?
Cool. Thanks,
All
you
right.
guys.
Thanks. Thank you, Alexa. All right, so now we've come to the part of the evening where we all introduce ourselves to each other, since this is a community, and just kind of, most of us know each other, but you know, there's always a few newcomers. Just say your name, who you work for if you want.